first question, what is StackOne's mission?
Right. So the mission and the vision is a bit different, but in a short elevator pitch, I say StackOne provides B2B SaaS vendors with a single unified API to provide high quality integrations, many tools at once. But the true vision is basically we envision a world where B2B software works together seamlessly, and you never have to look at features depending on like, how do they integrate with my tool, my specific tool, my specific CRM, marketing, HRIS. It's everything works seamlessly together, and that overall lets end users and customers, so not only B2B SaaS software, but their own users choose the best tool for the job instead of just choosing the tool that has the most integration, because at some point, every tool will integrate with each other. So we're just trying to make that vision true, and we're only one player out of this ecosystem. So yeah, we just want every software to integrate with each other.
And what sets you apart from your competitors?
So the way we differentiate ourselves with the competition, and I'd say the competition is a overall iPaaS market, so integration platform as a service. And a big part of those integration platforms have been what we consider incumbents, integration, workflow automation. So think about like kind of B2B Zapier, if you will. And I've had a lot of experience myself with those set of tools. I used them for several years at my past companies. And essentially the main issue with them is scale. They don't integrate very well with your development stack. They're great for prototyping. They're great for doing one-time integration with one customer. But as soon as you want to scale that user-specific workflow, but for 100, 200, 500 customers, they essentially make it very hard to manage, require a lot of maintenance. And instead, we take the view that it's good to have a product that's embedded in the engineering development stack, when most of the workflow automation tools take the view that they're trying to hack outside of the engineering stack. So we develop a unified API, and a unified API kind of unifying APIs into a single interface that is very easy to interact with. And the way we differentiate ourselves compared to other unified API is by basically being super privacy and security focused. The reason why I couldn't use existing unified API at my previous companies was that basically they were storing all the information themselves, replicating kind of a source of truth, which from a privacy and security standpoint is not great and often was a hard no from our customer standpoint. And that's why we decided to build a solution that essentially doesn't store or replicate any sensitive information in a permanent storage. And that's a big competitive advantage. Also allows for better bi-directional integrations where you both read and write, because we're real-time directly hitting the underlying system. So there is no like replication and delay from a third party or middle storage layer. So that's a very technical competitive advantage. But that's where we are at the moment.
Got it. No, that's good. Okay, and how does your team define quality developer experience?
The way our team defines quality developer experience is how fast can a developer get started with, in our case, the API with our product. And that's often related to how good the documentation is, of course. So how searchable is it? How much information is available there? And the more is explained upfront, the less they'll have to actually look into the code of our library of our API. So that's definitely a big point. And in the way that the SDK also relate to that. So a great developer experience means also a great SDK, especially not in every language. The SDKs won't have the same effectiveness in every language, but for example, TypeScript, super important to have a good SDK. It's very well documented types. And we saw that increases greatly the developer experience and how much even maintenance our team or how much support our team has to provide. Where it's just faster for the developers to look at the docs, use the SDK than it is to try to get these answers from our team. And that to me means a good developer experience.
Cool. And did your team, when you were setting out to build SDKs, did you consider using open source to develop SDKs?
Yeah, of course. So we actually used an open API generator for first SDK, which was a Ruby SDK. We also looked at Fern, which is also as an open source, I think both OpenAPI validator and SDK generator. And I think also we looked at the README OpenAI NPM package, which currently is actually used in our docs. So we looked at all of those. We actually used our first, so the OpenAPI generator for a few months before we realized obviously there was a lack of scale with OpenAPI generator, too much manual work. And because we have multiple APIs and we wanted to provide also a unified experience of using multiple APIs in one SDK, that's somewhere where the generators just meant too much work.
Got it. Anywhere else where you guys were finding yourselves needing to add manual patches?
I mean, initial generated Ruby SDK, we definitely had to do a lot of manual patches. There was some hard-coded rules around whether or not values are exactly in enums or not. Some very specific rules that made it that it was very difficult for us to actually update our API without breaking the SDK. And that definitely restricted our ability to just ship things. But I definitely also the publishing of those SDKs was something that was quite manual. We had to establish a CI/CD for it, especially with the open source OpenAPI generator, or even with the README NPM package that's just generating the library. It's not actually publishing the package. And that's where actually we wanted to go with Speakeasy, because we kind of provided that out of the box. So CI/CD was super easy to set up. And that made us save a lot of time, actually.
Nice. Yeah, that kind of goes directly into the next question. So what made you decide to start using Speakeasy, I guess, in addition to CI/CD?
So we definitely saw the lack of scalability of even having one SDK and maintaining that one SDK was tough because we had always some manual steps to do in the process. And we also didn't feel super confident about how updated that the OpenAPI open source generator that we were using was maybe maintained or not, how well maintained it was. On top of that, it's very much the idea that we wanted to combine multiple OpenAPI spec into one generated API. We wanted to provide additional functionalities such as handling of rate limits or error codes, and also a good pagination experience. And when we looked at the SDK that Speakeasy generated, we realized that it was, way better than what we had seen so far, and it was going to make us much more. It was going to make the generation of SDK much more scalable. The CI/CD experience was also quite well thought out. We, in an hour, we managed to get something set up. On top of that, I have to say also the team. So we initially interacted in the Slack channel. The team was super responsive. When we found an issue, he would fix it sometime within the day. And often when we just had a question, he would reply within the day. There's also a good community there. So there is always also other people asking questions that can be useful to us. But the support that we got from the Speakeasy team has been really, really great. And that was a big part to why we decided to go forward.
That's great. Thanks. And what has the reception of the SDKs been like, both internally and externally?
So internally, great reception. Overall, again, compared to the previous experience we had with the open source generators, it was night and day. Externally, there was definitely a bit of a curve because there was multiple versions of the TypeScript SDK, which is the first one we generated. So that means there started basically being a different or some breaking changes, which were for the better. Like the new version of the SDK is great, but also with some unexpected side effects. So externally, we had a bit of a growing pains, but it actually made us create a better API as well, because we saw how people were interacting with it, with the SDK, what the SDK was expecting. And now that there is dot validation on the TypeScript SDK, it makes it very strict that the OpenAPI spec respects what we actually send out, or vice versa. And so it does end up forcing us into creating a better API and having a better developer experience. But there was some growing pains along the way that were, as much us learning really than Speakeasy. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. That having SDKs does force you to hold yourself to kind of like a higher standard in terms of how you manage API
Another
development internally.
another thing that we've seen as a kind of a side benefit of Speakeasy and the TypeScript SDK is we use TypeScript ourselves. So we started using the SDK ourselves to generate tests, to test our API, principally again to just really have the same experience as our user, but also because we have a TypeScript stack, it actually helps us write kind of almost end-to-end test or integration test that are well more easily written, but also really testing the journey that includes dot validation of the schemas. So that was really good, useful as well for the team. So kind of a side effect that we didn't think about with the new TypeScript SDK, but that was really positive.
Awesome. And then final question is just what's next for StackOne? What do you guys have coming up in terms of your product roadmap?
So we're adding always more integrations and more schemas in our unified API. We are improving the debugging also process of how do you debug issues with integrations, which is a big part of why integrations are difficult. It's when they stop working for whatever reason. So we're making that ever more transparent, ever more powerful. And because also we're coming up with a new category of integration soon, a new vertical in the next couple months. I won't say too much about this, but it's still very much close to our existing integration. Yeah, always also embedding additional AI capabilities to create your own integration. So our goal is that, you know, it takes a click for someone to add a new vendor or new integration within a unified API, and we don't have to do that. So we're also working towards that via LLMs, but they're not the only kind of capabilities that can help create integration. So leveraging the open API standards and AI to make integration building a one-click thing. That's our big focus this quarter and next.
Sounds cool. So an API integration to build API integration.
Exactly.
It's cool. Awesome. Well, that was great. Yeah, we're looking forward to watching StackOne grow and working with you guys as you do.
And yeah, it's been lovely working with you guys.
Cool. All right, let me turn off the recording.